Hi, thank you for being here. My name is Rosemary, and I'm a parishioner at St. Ignatius of Loyola Catholic Church. As a mother of 3 young boys, I worry about what Denver will look like as they come of age. According to the American Lung Association's 2023 State of the Air report, the Denver metropolitan area ranks 6th for the number of high ozone days when compared to 227 other metro areas across the country. Will we continue this trajectory? After reviewing your platforms on climate justice, we want to know how you will make a serious commitment to reduce our carbon output. And as much as I worry about the state of our climate for my sons, I know that they will not bear the worst of the climate burden, which will be disproportionately borne by kids and families of color who live in neighborhoods like Elyria, Swansea. So our question for you is, how will you raise and spend the hundreds of millions required to reach 90% fossil fuel free by 2035? 2035 would be 12 years from now, or 3 terms for either one of you in office.
And we will take turns with who goes first. So Mike, will you go first on this one?
Thank you so much. This is an existential question for us. And when you think about what you love about Denver, many of you will think about the access to the natural environment. But as you said, to think about Denver as a city where you're not going to know in the summertime if you can take your daughter or your mother outside because the air pollution levels could be so high it's actually a danger to them. We can't abide having a city that's supposed to be a pride of the state about beauty be able to suffer from that kind of climate challenge. So you asked, what do we do and how do we do it? The beauty is the taxpayers of Denver have been very generous to create the climate office, which now has about $500 million over that 12 years that we could spend on climate. The question is, what do we do with it? I'm very proud of the fact that over my terms in the Senate, I've been a resolute and committed fighter on climate justice. That means we both helped create the first renewable energy standards. We helped close coal plants around the state to be able to make sure we got to more renewable energy. We helped create the first incentives to adopt electric vehicles and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but there's a lot more to do. So I think there are 3 top priorities for me we would go about this. One is, we know that about 50% of all of the emissions that are coming from the city of Denver right now are coming from buildings, from commercial buildings. So our first step has to be to push aggressively to electrify those buildings. That means moving our space heating and our water heating in all of those buildings to electric. If those are electric, we can then get wind and solar as the major suppliers of that electric grid, and we can green that energy at a very rapid rate. That's issue number 1. That's true for new buildings of both residential and commercial. We also then have to go back to retrofit the existing buildings. I had an office up in North Park Hill in the Holly for 10 years, and like many old buildings in the city, our utilities bill was often more than our rent bill because you have inefficient double pane windows, you don't have good furnaces, we don't have the updated materials we need to keep our climate impact low. So we need to go back and retrofit those buildings to make sure we can actually create jobs, but also make our climate impact smaller from the emissions from those buildings. And then third, we need to actually reduce our usage of vehicles. That means both encouraging more and more people to use public transit. It means incentivizing us to move away from fossil fuel vehicles. I will not ever buy a new fossil fuel vehicle for the Denver vehicle fleet. We instead need to convert that entire fleet to be electric as well, support residents to do that, and allow more and more people to use public transit that make that easy and convenient and accessible so we can find ways to get out of our cars and onto public transit, and the cars that we do use are electric. Because if we don't take dramatic steps now to reduce that emissions, we know that already we'll be too late. Thank you.
Thank you. Kelly.
I really do appreciate this question because it's also high math, but not really. I think the estimates are we need almost 200 million per year if we're going to achieve the goals that we have today. So $500 million in 12 years is not going to get us there. When you look at today, we've generously approved the city to have about 42 million we collect now in our climate tax. We also collect about 27 million from the trash fee that we've started to charge. I think that should be dedicated to climate. The whole point is an environmental impact by charging all of us. We have a parks fund that generates about 45 million. Some pieces of that I think would qualify to try to help us get to the 198 million. But we're challenged. I think part of our strategy in the short term could be the Infrastructure Jobs Act, the Inflation Reduction Act. These things are at risk as the federal government talks about the debt ceiling, but there's huge resources there. I would not only commit to work as a region to bring those resources back to this region and try to have an impact on the kind of investments we have to make, from electrifying our fleets, not just the city of Denver. We got to partner with DPS and RTD, because if we don't do this as a region, as a state, we will never impact those climate goals. So I would also work with others throughout this region to talk about their commitments to make this investment with us and to make this transition. I would also commit, you probably know, President Biden has made a commitment that those federal dollars require that 40% go to the communities who've been most negatively impacted historically. We would commit 50% of those funds out of Denver go into those communities where we're electrifying first. It will save our families money as we try to do that work. 50% of the impact of our air today, though, definitely comes from Suncor, also in those communities. And we know the fines and penalties are not addressing that issue. I think we have to get much more serious with the state about steps we need to take to address that. And then the bad news that a candidate is never supposed to tell you, but we're going to have to change our behavior. Driving is about 50% of this challenge. And I think that means us working together to figure out what does it take to get out of our cars. How should we be charging for RTD so we can remove that barrier and ensure more of us can make that choice to be able to get out of our cars? But I also think we still have a first and last mile challenge in that regard. And we'll talk about that later because I'm out of time.
Thank you. Thank you, Kelly.